Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the program where we discuss the noble life and the noble seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. My name is Habib Bobat, and inshallah I'll be part and parcel of this journey as we go through the different phases of the Prophet's life, the different phases of Nubuwah, and the different phases of his mission as he journeyed into this crucial part of his mission as a Nabi. So in our previous episode, we spoke at great length the period where the wahi and the revelation stopped, and then the revelation started again, and how the Prophet of Allah went home to seek comfort, and how Jibreel al-Amin appeared and presented the message of Allah, saying to the Prophet of Allah, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'anzir, wa rabbaka fakabbir, wa thiyabaka fatahhir, wa rujza fahjur, wa la tamnun tastakthir. We spoke at great length about these verses that were revealed to the Prophet of Allah and how it ties into modern day da'wah as we also navigate around this key issue of our life. Now, when this revelation came down, the second revelation, the Prophet of Allah now realized that this is real, this is happening. I am the Nabi and I have to take this mission on. So, there are different stages of his mission. The first stage of his mission was limited to the people around him. He wasn't told to go out and preach to everybody. As you would see, when the Prophet of Allah came to the latter part of his mission, he was told to preach to anybody and everybody. He was told to preach to the people inside of Mecca, the people coming outside of Mecca into Mecca, and he spread his message far and wide. But the first stage, today we are going to talk about the first stage of da'wah, where the da'wah was very limited to the people around him. And he's not yet going public with the message. It's a covert operation. It's very closed. It's a very close-knit circle. The Prophet of Allah is carefully inviting selective individuals and selective peoples to the message of Islam. So this is the first phase that we are going to talk about today. The first person to accept Islam at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ is Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha, the beloved wife of the Prophet ﷺ, who has now been married to him for over 10 years. Over 10 years she is married to him. And the Prophet ﷺ is living with her for a very long time. So she saw his character. She witnessed his nobility. She saw that this is a man with noble character and impeccable integrity, that this man cannot lie. He cannot make up something. He cannot fabricate something from his side. And so when the Prophet of Allah presented the message of Islam to Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha, she became the first lady and the first person to accept Islam. How fortunate was Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha, the first woman to accept Islam, the first woman to hear revelation and wahi coming down, the first woman to pray, the first woman to recite the Quran, the first woman to learn the teachings of Islam. Because Jibreel came and he taught the Prophet of Allah how to make wudu and how to pray, and then he in return taught Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha how to pray, how to make wudu, and how to read Quran. So this is the first lady. And again I want to highlight this point. If you recall, we had a lengthy discussion on the life of Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha and the role of women in Islam. We spoke about this at great length in the previous episodes. If you missed it, you can look up that episode and follow that episode closely. But once again, I'm going to reiterate here. Look at, this is not by coincidence. This is not by coincidence that she becomes the first person to accept Islam. This is by deliberate design Allah wanted for her to become the first person to accept Islam, to be at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ. And so she accepted Islam. She recognized the truth of the message of the Prophet ﷺ. She understood the veracity of the mission of the Prophet ﷺ. So this again speaks to her nobility, her deep understanding, and her loyalty to her husband, and her loyalty to the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the first person is who? A lady. The first person to accept Islam is a lady, Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha. So she becomes the first person, and she continues to support the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the first youngster, the first lady is Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha. The first youngster to accept Islam is Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Ali bin Abi Talib was a youngster. He was a youngster, and we know that Abu Talib was struggling financially. The father of Ali was Abu Talib, and Abu Talib was not well off financially at that time. So the Prophet ﷺ had offered his uncle to say, I will take care of Ali, you give him over to me, and he will remain with me in my custody, and I will look after him, and he will grow up in my place. So Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu had already been exposed to the nobility, the integrity, and the uprightness of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Prophet of Allah invited Ali, he accepted Islam also. And his father initially was not aware that he accepted Islam. And Ali ibn Abi Talib, this youngster, would go quietly into the valleys of Mecca with the Prophet ﷺ to pray in the cover of the valley, and then come back later on at home. So Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu was a noble man. He was a brave person, and he supported the message of the Prophet ﷺ from the very beginning. We are talking about the first batch of people to accept Islam. So the second was Ali. He becomes the second person, or we can say he is the first youngster to become a Muslim. The third person to become a Muslim, and here we will say the third person, or we can say the first slave. So Khadija, first woman, Ali radiallahu ta'ala an, first youngster, and the first slave. We know that slavery was rife in the Arab culture, and the first person to become a Muslim from the slave group was Zayd ibn Haritha radiyallahu ta'ala an. Now Zayd, there's an interesting story behind him which we will discuss. I did make mention of this in brief in our previous episodes. I will reiterate it here again, that Zayd ibn Haritha was in the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was gifted to the Prophet of Allah. The story goes that when the Prophet of Allah got married, Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha had gifted Zayd to the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm cutting the long story short here. He was originally a free man. Zayd ibn Haritha was a free man, and he belonged to a free family. But he was taken as a captive and forcefully sold off as a slave at that time, and people did not know about this. Anyways, his father and uncle were looking for him for a very long time, very long time. They had looked and searched for Zayd, the lost son. Eventually, they got to know that he is in Mecca and he is working for a person called Muhammad. So they came to the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the father and the uncle, and he explained the entire background to say that this is my son, he is a free person, he is not a slave, and I would like to take him back. When we return from the break, we will continue with the story of Zayd, a fascinating one indeed. He is one of the early people to accept Islam. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the program. We are discussing the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and we are discussing the early batch or the first batch of Muslims to accept Islam. We had started off the story of Zayd ibn Haritha. Zayd ibn Haritha was working in the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet of Allah was very fond of him, In fact, he was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad. Zayd, the son of Muhammad. Because in the early stages of Islam, it was permissible for you to adopt somebody else and refer to them as your children. And at that time, they would inherit from you and you would inherit from them, even though they were not your biological children. So, in line with the Arab culture, the Prophet ﷺ had declared that Zayd is my son. Anyways, the story goes that Zayd was the slave in the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and his father was looking for him for a very long time. So the father of Zayd and the uncle of Zayd came to Mecca, and they got to know that he is working for Muhammad ﷺ. And when that happened, they came to the Prophet of Allah and they said, this youngster in your custody is not a slave. He is a free man and he belongs to me. I am the father and this is his uncle. Please, we would like to return back with our son. So the Prophet of Allah said, by me it's fine. Let's do like this. We call him and we give him the choice. If he decides to return with you, then by all means you can take him. And if he decides to stay, then you would allow for him to stay. So the father thought to himself that which person would ever abandon their family? Of course, my son will choose me over anybody. So the Prophet ﷺ had called for Zayd, and Zayd came and he said to Zayd, this is your father, this is your uncle. They have come here to return with you, and they are giving you the choice of whether you want to stay or not. So Zayd ibn Haritha said, I will choose Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam over anybody, anytime. So the father said, how can you choose a stranger over your own father? Number one. And number two, how can you choose slavery over freedom? Here is your father, and this is your uncle. Why are you not returning back with us? And Zayd ibn Haritha said, I have been exposed to this wonderful man, Muhammad, and he's still not a Nabi at that time. And I am impressed by the integrity, the character, and the uprightness of the Prophet or of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So the father and the uncle returns. After this day, the Prophet of Allah then frees him. He was a slave. Then the Prophet of Allah freed him and made him his son, his adopted son. And until the revelation came down later on that you cannot refer to your adopted sons as your own son. أُدْعُوهُمْ لِآبَائِهِمْ who are aqsatu inda Allah, rather make reference to their original parents or their biological parents. So the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum knew that Zayd was very close to the Prophet of Allah. He was extremely close to the Prophet of Allah. And not just Zayd. Later on when Zayd got married and he had a son by the name of Usama, Usama was also beloved to the Prophet of Allah. Usama ibn Zayd. Very famous companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So one of the first people to accept Islam was Zayd ibn Haritha, the freed slave of the Prophet ﷺ, the adopted son at that time of the Prophet ﷺ. Now Zayd ibn Haritha becomes the first slave. So we've discussed Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, the first lady to accept Islam. We've discussed Ali ibn Abi Talib as the first youngster to accept Islam. We then discussed now Zayd ibn Haritha, the first slave to accept Islam. So there's many first. First lady, first youngster, first slave. Then comes the first free men. The first free men. Ali ibn Abi Talib is a youngster, Zayd ibn Haritha is a slave. And Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu becomes the first free men to accept Islam. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu was a close companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam even before Islam. So he had already known of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He knew that this is an integrable, a man with integrity. He knew that this man does not worship idol. So did Abu Bakr did not worship idol. He knew the Prophet of Allah did not drink alcohol. He did not gamble. He did not commit adultery or fornication. And Abu Bakr was likewise an upright individual, a very respectable person, a very notable person in the society. So Abu Bakr now accepted Islam. And the interesting thing about Abu Bakr is that when the message of Islam was presented to him by Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he accepted the Islam without any hesitation. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that I had presented the message of Islam to many people, and each person would take out time to contemplate, and he would take his own time, and when he was ready, he would come back and accept Islam. Except for Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr did not hesitate in the least. I presented the message, and immediately, instantaneously, spontaneously, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu brought Iman there and there on the spot. He did not say, let me go home, let me think about it, let me consult with my wife, let me consult with my parents, let me get back to you tomorrow, let me sleep over this matter. He did not say that. There and there, he accepted Islam. And that's one of the reasons why the Prophet of Allah had so much of confidence in him and kept him so close that he was part of every integral mission after that. The Quran refers to Abu Bakr as ثاني اثنين إذ هما في الغار, and the second of the two who were in the grave. إذ يقول لصاحبه. The Quran attests to the companionship of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. This is his status. That is why the ulama mention that the person who speaks ill of Abu Bakr and disbelieves in Abu Bakr has become a kafir and a non-believer, because his companionship is proven by the Quran, and none like him is in the ranks of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum. And our iman is that the greatest individual after the prophets is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He is the highest. Right there on top. Right there on top is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And this noble man, when he accepted Islam, Allahu Akbar, it opened many doors for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also. And how so? When Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu accepted Islam, then many people entered into Islam at the hands of Abu Bakr. When he accepted Islam, he immediately got working. And he invited people like Uthman ibn Affan, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, and other Sahaba, key individuals. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu had invited, and they all accepted Islam at his hands. And why is this so? Because Abu Bakr was a very notable figure in the Qurayshi circle. He was well respected. He was a scholar in genealogy. He was educated. He was literate. And he had noble traits and qualities which the people of Quraysh had recognized in him and respected him for. And so when he invited people towards Islam, after he became a Muslim, people did not need to doubt him, because they knew that this is Abu Bakr. This is not an unknown person to us. This is a dignified person. And this is a person whom we know, and this is a person whom we are familiar with. So Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu invited the likes of Uthman ibn Affan, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awam, and Talha ibn Ubaidillah. These are the people that accepted Islam at the hands of Abu Bakr. Amongst the first people to accept Islam was also the household of the Prophet ﷺ, that is the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ. They had all accepted Islam at the hands of their father, and we know that all of his daughters, Zainab, Kulthum, Fatima, Ruqayya, all four daughters had accepted Islam at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ. We know that at this time the Prophet of Allah did not have any male offspring. He did not have any sons at this stage. He had his four daughters, Zainab, Fatima, Kulthum, and Ruqayya. And all of them accepted Islam. And the ulama comment that this speaks to the parenting style of Khadija and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they had raised such noble children that when the message of Islam was presented to them, they did not doubt, they were not skeptical, they understood the veracity of the message, and they also accepted Islam. Because one of the challenges you face as a parent is that your own children don't believe in you. Your own children struggle to see your vision. Your own children struggle to see your mission. Your own children struggle to see things how you see. So one of your Achilles heel is your children. This is your difficulty in life. But the ulama comment that the fact that the children of the Prophet ﷺ, all of them accepting Islam, speaks to the fact that they came from a noble home, their parents were noble, and they were given a noble upbringing. Otherwise, if they were growing up in a culture of rebellion, in a culture where they were told to do as they pleased, it would have become difficult for them to adapt to the new lifestyle, because it meant settling in new ways, it meant adopting new lifestyle, it meant adopting new ideologies, and this was difficult for them. So the fact that they accepted Islam speaks to their honor, their dignity, and their magnanimity, that as the children of the Prophet, they were all on the same page. There were prophets in the past, their own children did not accept the message. You look at Nuh alayhi salam. Nuh alayhi salam pleaded with his son that, come on, join my mission, hop on board, come onto the ship, come onto the ark, you will be saved. He was not blessed with Iman. Allah did not intend for him to have Iman. And so when the great flood came, the son of Nuh was also wiped out. Which means that being a Nabi and having your child to accept Islam is not a given. It could be that your child will accept Islam, and it could be that your child will not accept Islam. Anything can happen. But here in the story of the Prophet ﷺ, all of his daughters, Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, Fatimatu Zahra, radiyallahu ta'ala anhunna ajma'in, all of them accepted Islam. All of them. So this tells you that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was fortunate on that front, because the Prophet of Allah cannot give hidayah to anybody. The Prophet of Allah cannot give Iman to anybody. It is only by Allah and by His will. So the Prophet of Allah is fortunate that all of his daughters had accepted Islam at his hands. So these are now basically this is now the first batch of mu'mineen. First lady, Khadija. First youngster, Ali. First slave, Zayd ibn Haritha. And the first free man is Abu Bakr. And the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ. And then the people who accepted at the hands of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. May Allah be pleased with all of them. These are the first batch of people to accept Islam. In our next episode, we'll go into more details, insha'Allah.